Can you believe we're at the end? It went by so fast, didn't it? But it's not the end of us growing in our understanding and knowledge of what it means to be lights to this world. My prayer is that this is just a launching point in order for you to become more aware of what God is calling you to do in the darkness of this world. I saved the best until last because God, the glory of God, is the entire reason we exist and the entire reason we are lights. As we looked at the glory of God this week, I purposely did not give you a definition because I wanted you to experience God's glory for yourself. As we looked at scriptures that described his glory, my hope was that you came up with your own definition and understanding of what God's glory is. See, God's glory is very hard to define because it's such a big thing that we can't adequately describe it in our human limited words, in our limited understanding. John Piper, who I would say remains as one of the experts on God's glory, would describe it like this: the glory of God is the manifest beauty of his holiness. It is the going public of his holiness, as well as the glory of God is the infinite beauty and the greatness of God's manifold perfections. In other words, it's God's display of himself. All his intrinsic attributes, the goodness and holiness, his magnificence and power, on display for us to see. That is his glory. And the amazing thing is that as we spend time in God's presence, as we worship him, we also display that glory. Just as Moses, as he spent time in God's presence, that glory reflected off of his face. Or the moon that we talked about this week, that rock that has no light in of itself, but because of the vastness and awesomeness of the sun, reflects that light onto the earth. But sometimes we use these Christian terms like the presence of God, and we don't really understand what that means. What does being in God's presence mean? And how can we increase our time in God's presence so that we can reflect him more and more? Well, the first thing about God's presence is that it is limitless and timeless. The Bible begins and ends with the presence of God. He was, he is, and he is to come. God's presence has always existed and it will always exist. And he's also omnipresent, which means he is everywhere at all times. I think a lot of time we get it wrong in our terminology when it comes to God's presence. I often hear in prayers and in songs asking for God's presence, and I've even done it too. But the reality is, he's already there. He's already present. We need to be asking to acknowledge God's presence, to understand that he's right there with us, no matter what. It's an acknowledgement of God at every point of our lives, everywhere we are, and in everything we do. Psalm 139, 7-12 says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Oh, where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you." It's again that idea of turning ourselves to God and to his Spirit, being aware of his presence in our lives, so in allowing him to be reflected in our lives. The Lord's presence fills the heavens and earth. Even Rahab the prostitute acknowledged this when she said to the spies in Joshua 2:11, she said, "As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and in the earth beneath." We also see this in Jeremiah 23:24, which says, "Can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him? Declares the Lord. Do I not fill heaven and earth? Declares the Lord." His presence fills heaven and earth. He is with us. Even when you don't sense it or feel it, his presence is there. He's with you, and he will never leave you. Another amazing aspect of God's presence is that he is both immanent, which means he is near and present in our lives, and he is transcendent, which means he is beyond our understanding and comprehension. That's the crazy thing about our God. He can be both near us, wanting that intimate relationship with us, and yet he is the God of the universe, completely beyond our understanding and comprehension. Isaiah 55, 8-9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and thoughts your thoughts." This is what makes our God better than any of the other so-called gods. In all the other religions, their gods are limited. They're limited to a space and to time, to a statue, to a temple. They're not near and present to their worshipers like our God is. Our God has no limitations, and our God desires a relationship, a personal relationship with his worshipers, with you and with me. God is present in your life and will always be available. And we just need to become more aware of his presence and spend more time in his presence. Coram Deo is a Latin phrase meaning in the presence of God. According to R.C. Sproul, the essence of Coram Deo is to live one's entire life in the presence of God, under the authority of God, to the glory of God. Man, that's what I want. To live my entire life in the presence of God, under the authority of God, to the glory of God. So how do we do that? Well, two aspects of practicing the presence of God that I would like to discuss with you today are interrupted times with God and uninterrupted times with God. So first, let's talk about those interrupted times with God. And that's practicing God's presence in our day-to-day lives, in the busyness of our days, when we're driving our car, shopping at the store, making dinner, vacuuming the floor. At all times, we need to be in communion with God. A well-known authority on God's presence was a monk by the name of Brother Lawrence. He put a book together called The Practice of the Presence of God, which I would highly recommend. Now remember, of course, he's a monk, so he didn't have all the responsibilities that we have as moms and wives, but still, he gives us tools in order to practice God's presence in our busy mom lives, in our busy lives of being wives to our husbands. What Brother Lawrence teaches us is how to cultivate a deep relationship with God in our daily lives, in everything that we do. In his book, he explains examples of just how he would go about talking to the Lord in his daily chores, whether he's washing dishes or doing farming. This is what he says. It doesn't take much of us, merely a thought of him from time to time, a little act of adoration, sometimes to ask for his grace, sometimes to offer him your sufferings, at other times to thank him for the graces past and present he has bestowed on you. In the midst of your troubles, to take solace in him as often as you can. Lift up your heart to him during your meals and in company, at least little remembrances that will always be the most pleasing to him. One need not cry out very loudly. He is nearer to us than we think. He talks about this as a discipline of acknowledging God, something that we actually have to train our body and minds to do. We don't naturally just often think about God throughout our day. We actually have to train our thoughts and our minds. And he gives us examples to do this. We could set a timer for every 15 minutes when that timer goes off to practice that presence of God, to acknowledge God's presence. Or put note cards in key locations like your dashboard, your mirrors, your kitchen sink to remind you of God and his promises. You could have worship music on in the background as you're doing your chores, as you're teaching your children, so that you keep God's presence in your mind throughout the day. But the reality is that it does take time and it does take practice to actually train ourselves to practice his presence. You know, I found that I do pretty well with this, especially after I have had kids, with this interrupted time. Because all I have time for now is a one-liner to God, a cry out for help, a single praise or a thanks. What I struggle with is that uninterrupted time with God, that isolated time to sit at God's feet and just be with him, just worship him. But there is something about those long, intimate moments with the Lord without distractions or anything else. Those times of deep prayer, of meditation, of worship, and listening to his voice. You know, so often I hear people say that they don't feel loved by God. And my response is, of course you don't, because you don't allow him the time to love you. You don't give him the time to pour his love out over you, to pour his grace out on you. If we're not sitting at his feet and worshiping him, if we're just too busy, how are you going to feel his love? Allow him to love you. Give him that time. You would give your husband the time. You would give your children the time. Give the Lord of your life time and sit at his feet and worship him. We need both. We need the uninterrupted time and the interrupted time in order to go about practicing the presence of God. As we spend more time in God's presence and allow him, his glory, his light, his image will actually be rubbed off on us, and we'll display him. His light will rub off on us, and will be his light. We are reflections as we reflect his light to others. So as we close today, I just want to thank you for spending this time with me, for doing this study, for taking the time to read his word, and for taking the time to be his lights. I just am so excited to see what God will do in your life, to see the opportunities he will give you, the people that he will place in your path, and those who will see real salvation because of your light. So go forth and shine on, dear sister. Stay in his word. You are equipped for everything that you need. Practice his presence. Know that he loves you and he wants to use you. I love you too, and I hope that you've enjoyed this study. God bless you. Amen.